The DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's residence is a messy, complex mixture. These are not the theories of an amateur. This isn't neighborhood gossip or a thread on a message board. This is the official conclusion of a forensic genetic genealogist, with the credentials and history to prove it. A local news station that has covered every step of this case since February has verified these findings. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has had every opportunity to deny this, yet they remain silent. Multiple contributors. A complex mixture. Biological traces from several different individuals were pulled from the scene. Detectives secured this forensic material from inside the home of an 84-year-old woman. She vanished at the end of January, leaving a void that this community has been methodically trying to fill. While the major networks look elsewhere, those following this case have been haunted by a single quiet question. It is a technical, forensic question that no one in the traditional media has been brave enough to voice. No news anchor has put these specific words on a teleprompter or a broadcast graphic. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has avoided addressing this specific detail in any public forum. Even the FBI, currently embedded in this investigation, refuses to offer any public clarity on the matter. Tonight we ask that question directly, and by name. To grasp the answer, we have to look at the cold logic of the events leading to this moment. We are going back to the forensic evidence to examine how this DNA was first discovered. You have tracked this case since February. The names and dates are already familiar to you. You know the flower pots, the back door, and the precise ticking of the pacemaker timeline. You remember the doorbell camera going dark and the vacant house sitting silent next door. The community has already mapped out the contractor trail and the questions of property access. Every piece of data assembled by the public has led us to this specific intersection. We are revisiting the DNA evidence tonight to build a solid foundation for what is coming. The question we are approaching is hidden entirely within the jagged edges of these forensic details. Precision is the only way to understand why this specific evidence changes everything. Nancy Guthrie was 84, the mother of a well-known national television personality. Her home on North Craycroft Road in Tucson has been a silent crime scene since late January 2026. That is the frame of our investigation, the starting point for every dark detail that followed. We are weighing what the law has confirmed against the silence they have chosen to maintain. This entire timeline is anchored to the last moment anyone can confirm Nancy was still alive. On the night of January 31st, she shared a meal with family before returning home alone. Then, the trail went cold for days until her family realized she was truly gone. The Pima County Sheriff's Department then launched an investigation that the entire country is now watching. Every detail we discuss is pulled directly from the investigative record and verified forensic facts. We are following the evidence strictly as it appears in the official documents of this case. In February 2026, the Sheriff's Department formally announced that DNA evidence had been recovered. That biological material was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home and confirmed through official police channels. This wasn't a leak or a rumor. It was a formal acknowledgement reported by every major outlet. Soon after, CeCe Moore, the world's most prominent figure in genetic genealogy, became involved. Her career is defined by decades of work, solving cases that other experts deemed impossible. She has worked with every level of the justice system, from local precincts to federal agencies. Moore has testified in high-stakes proceedings where her analysis was the difference between life and death. She does not speak publicly on active cases unless she understands the gravity of the data. In an on-the-record interview, Moore admitted that she realized the complexity of the sample almost immediately. She identified it as a complex mixture, a forensic term for a deeply difficult biological puzzle. In forensics, a complex mixture means the sample contains DNA from 3 or more people. While 2 profiles can be separated by math, 3 or more creates a technical wall. This makes identifying individual contributors an agonizing computational challenge. The statistical probability of identifying a specific individual increases exponentially. Complex biological mixtures represent the most formidable puzzles in forensic DNA analysis. They demand aggressive mathematical modeling and probabilistic algorithms. These samples often necessitate repeated laboratory extraction cycles and rigorous retesting. Technicians must iterate through numerous reference profiles to isolate every distinct genetic contributor. Resolution is a slow, grueling process, particularly when contributors remain unknown. Fox 10, Phoenix provided independent confirmation regarding this intricate profile. We now have the Sheriff's Department admitting that forensic material was indeed pulled from the scene. CeCe Moore is formally documented, labeling it a complex genetic blend involving multiple distinct individuals. Fox 10 Phoenix echoes this exact forensic classification. 3 separate verification pillars for a single piece of biological evidence. Now, consider the silence. The department refuses to state the exact count of contributors trapped in that sample. They remain tight-lipped on whether every person has been named. They have avoided clarifying if any genetic segment remains a ghost, specifically if there is a profile present that refuses to align with any provided reference sample. Officials have not verified if this biological evidence was handed over for genetic genealogy, even as CeCe Moore's public interest in the evidence triggers heavy questions. Each of these tactical silences represents a void the public is desperate to fill. These answers remain withheld. Let us return to January 31st, the final documented night. We must reconstruct those final hours with clinical precision because the entire weight of this tragedy rests on that date. Nancy Guthrie sat down for dinner with her family. This is an established fact. Several news organizations have verified her presence among relatives that night, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department has issued no correction to the record. This gathering was described as entirely mundane, a standard family meal. There is absolutely nothing in the investigative files indicating tension or erratic behavior. There were no psychological red flags marking this as Nancy's final night alive. Following the meal, Tomaso Cioni provided Nancy a ride back to her residence. NBC News has verified this movement, and the Sheriff's Department has acknowledged the transit. Cioni is Nancy's son-in-law, the man married to her daughter Annie. He left her at the house on North Craycroft Road. That marks the final verified interaction. What transpired in the subsequent hours forms the black hole at the center of this case. The department has suppressed all information regarding the doorbell camera's activity during that critical window. The state of that digital witness, whether it functioned, was erased, or captured a predator, remains a hauntingly vacant piece of the puzzle. The public has been scrutinizing this lack of transparency from the start. Records show that once Nancy was reported missing, the gears of law enforcement accelerated instantly. The FBI arrived with a swiftness that suggests a high-stakes scenario. Federal intervention is rarely this immediate for missing persons, unless the circumstances suggest a violent escalation or a specific jurisdictional trigger. The sudden presence of federal agents implies kidnapping, interstate criminal activity, or a level of danger that exceeds local capabilities. The Bureau was active. Just weeks after the search began, the Pima County Sheriff made a definitive public claim. Every member of the family, including all siblings and their spouses, was officially cleared of any involvement. That exoneration specifically included Tomaso Cioni. To be perfectly clear, the authorities have removed him from the list of suspects. That is the formal stance of the Pima County Sheriff. He is a free man. The independent inquiry does not aim to challenge that official status. This distinction must be internalized before we move into the darker corners of the evidence. However, what cleared actually entails in a forensic is precisely what this inquiry must examine. The distinction carries massive weight. When law eliminate a person of interest, they are making a specific judgment on criminal intent. They believe, based on their current files, that this person did not pull the trigger. That is a tactical, investigative conclusion. It is not a biological absolute. It is not a definitive statement regarding the presence of DNA. It doesn't mean the individual's genetic markers are absent from the mixture or that their profile was successfully isolated and removed. It simply means they are not the primary perpetrator. These are related yet radically separate determinations. Now, let us look at the selective transparency of the department. Pima County has maintained a heavy presence. Sheriff Chris Nanos has stood before microphones, issuing carefully worded statements and conducting briefings. Yet, throughout this controlled narrative, the official record regarding Nancy Guthrie's final hours, official statements follow a calculated architecture, provide a skeletal framework, but maintain a total blackout on forensic specifics. The Pima County Sheriff's Department officially designated Nancy Guthrie as missing, launching a high-priority active investigation. Genetic material was recovered from the residence. Investigators have now systematically excluded all family members as potential suspects. Federal agents are now assisting as this active, high-stakes investigation continues to intensify. Authorities refuse to confirm the number of genetic contributors or if every distinct profile has been successfully isolated. They remain silent on reference matches, unidentified signatures, the nature of surveillance footage, or the property's digital trail. Footage from the surrounding perimeter remains classified, as does the current trajectory of every lead the task force follows. This wall of silence is tactical. In federal cases, law enforcement almost universally bury the specific forensic details. Withholding data from the public serves critical operational goals, protecting the logical integrity of the manhunt from outside interference. Exposing the number of contributors to a DNA mixture would essentially hand the perpetrator a map of the evidence. Confirming that an unidentified profile exists warns a suspect that they are already caught in the forensic crosshairs. Concealing surveillance details prevents a killer from tailoring a false alibi around the known blind spots of the cameras. This secrecy ensures the suspect cannot manipulate their story based on what the digital lenses actually captured or missed. Maintaining this void is standard protocol, a logical maneuver that should not be interpreted as a deceptive cover-up. However, the public is not merely accepting the quiet, they are now applying surgical pressure to one specific point. There is a unique category of forensic data that could be released without risking the success of the hunt. Yet, authorities have chosen to withhold this information, despite it posing zero threat to their active operational strategy. The question is this: has the DNA mixture been fully resolved through the use of known reference samples? Law enforcement likely sampled every contractor, caregiver, and repair worker who had documented access to Nancy's private sanctuary. If those references accounted for every signature in the mixture, confirming that fact publicly would not compromise any leads. Stating the genetic puzzle is solved would not reveal evidence or expose the identity of any specific person of interest. It would simply define the parameters of the case without identifying a primary target or a potential suspect. Such a confirmation would effectively close a forensic loop that the community has obsessively questioned for several months now. The Sheriff's Department has repeatedly bypassed the chance to clarify this, a choice that seems increasingly like a deliberate tactic. Whether it is rigid policy or strategic silence, this is the exact point where public logic begins to sharpen. The refusal to speak on this detail leaves the most devastating question in the Guthrie case completely open. Is there an unidentified predator hidden in that DNA? Let us analyze the digital architects currently dissecting this case. We must examine the cold, methodological engine driving this investigative community, rather than just the specific questions they ask. Understanding their analytical process is vital to grasping why these specific inquiries are so potentially explosive to the case. Online forensic hubs have developed a level of analytical sophistication that rivals the operations of many professional intelligence agencies. The Nancy Guthrie disappearance has mobilized a cadre of elite citizen investigators who operate with terrifying technical rigor. These are not hobbyists following a gut hunch. They are analysts functioning strictly within the realm of hard data. They are currently weaponizing property tax records and mapping ownership history to build a three-dimensional view of the crime. They are strip mining social media metadata and dissecting the syntactic structure of every single word in the official statements. By comparing word shifts across different press releases, they identify the specific terminology that the police are carefully avoiding. The DNA mixture became the structural spine of their analysis the moment CeCe Moore's professional findings were made public. Their questions are not the products of paranoia, they are fundamentally undeniable and legitimate in clinical forensic terms. These are the precise inquiries a seasoned defense attorney would use to dismantle a prosecution's case during discovery. They are the clinical demands an expert witness would make before certifying the significance of any biological evidence. Any honest evaluation of this physical evidence must account for these variables, and the community is demanding answers. In any scenario involving a complex genetic cocktail from a scene, only two forensic realities can possibly exist. Either the puzzle is complete, meaning every cell belongs to a known individual, or the math leaves a ghost. The alternative is an unresolved mixture, meaning at least one unidentified profile remains entirely unaccounted for in the data. This is a binary state. The evidence either points to a known circle of people or it does not. If resolved, the DNA yields 0 unidentified leads, forcing the hunt into the cold shadows of surveillance footage, electronic records, and witness accounts. The biological chapter effectively closes. But if there is a phantom profile, an unknown signature that does not belong, That ghost profile, the biological signature of a phantom intruder, stands as the most potent, direct lead in this entire nightmare. It is the cold physical evidence of a person whose presence inside that home has absolutely no logical explanation. This forensic thread is the one investigators are pulling with predatory focus while the community remains blind to the facts. The authorities hold the answers in a vault, refusing to utter a single syllable to the increasingly desperate, terrified public. Citizens are now forced to scavenge through every scrap of public data, hunting for any indirect sign of investigative progress. They are dissecting the clinical cadence of press briefings and the erratic timing of official statements to find hidden clues. They are searching for a tell. Is this an active hunt or a stagnant phase of documentation and quiet waiting? Every discovery ends in a void because the official record has been sterilized to ensure almost nothing of substance leaks. The conversation inevitably returns to that DNA strand and the haunting question of whose biological material was found. It isn't that they are certain a killer's DNA exists, it is the realization they haven't been told otherwise. In the clinical logic of a manhunt, that uncertainty matters. Enter CeCe Moore and genetic genealogy. We must examine Moore more closely because she isn't just a media personality weighing in on a high-profile case. Her specific mastery of human blueprints and her engagement with the Guthrie evidence carries a much darker, heavier significance. The community is watching her moves, sensing that her involvement signals a major shift in the forensic landscape. Forensic genetic genealogy is a modern weapon forged from the massive datasets of the commercial DNA testing market. The logic is simple and brutal. If an unknown profile hits a wall in CODIS, you look elsewhere. When traditional criminal databases come up empty, you can identify a suspect by searching consumer genealogy platforms for family. If a distant relative uploaded a sample to a site like GEDmatch, the trap is effectively set. If that relative is identified through research, then the family tree can be reverse-engineered to find the predator. The biological map is built out until the unknown individual is trapped within the branches of their own lineage. This precise method shattered the 40-year silence of the Golden State Killer back in 2018. Joseph James DeAngelo was a ghost in police databases, but his distant kin had unknowingly betrayed him online. Moore's team mapped the tree, narrowed the suspects in that geographic zone, and moved in for the kill. Traditional testing confirmed the match with surgical precision, finally putting a name to decades of calculated violent horror. A case that had been frozen for more than 40 years was closed, changing the rules of the game. Since then, this genealogical hunt has been deployed to crack dozens of previously unsolvable and cold criminal cases. The power of this technique peaks when the system fails, when the killer is not in any government database. When CeCe Moore speaks publicly about the Guthrie DNA mixture, she is not performing a neutral act. She understands the weight of every word she drops regarding a complex multi-contributor biological sample in this case. She is acutely aware that commentary on forensic evidence in an active federal investigation carries massive psychological gravity. The central question remains, why is she speaking now, and what does it reveal about the state of evidence? Does her engagement suggest that the forensic trail is far more advanced than the authorities are willing to say? There is no confirmed answer, but genetic genealogy becomes vital in the exact scenario this community currently fears. It points toward an unknown contributor who left a mark but does not exist in any traditional criminal database. Identifying such a person requires this advanced genealogical approach to put a name to the biological material found. The FBI has full access to these tools and has been lurking in this investigation since day one. CeCe Moore is now publicly dissecting the evidence. Whether these facts are connected is a haunting, unanswered question. What this implies about the current state of identifying the Guthrie mixture remains a tightly guarded investigative secret. But the public is holding all three data points together and finding it impossible to see them as unrelated. The FBI silence is deafening, especially when paired with the nagging questions regarding that second camera's footage. The Bureau's presence in the Guthrie case was confirmed early, yet their actual purpose remains a classified mystery. Federal agents joined the hunt almost immediately, a fact that suggests a level of severity the police won't name. Normally, a missing person is a local matter, handled by the county sheriff or the small-town police department. The Bureau doesn't just show up unless the facts of the case suggest a clear bridge to federal jurisdiction. The most frequent trigger for federal involvement is evidence that a victim was forcibly transported across state lines. This case crosses lines. Kidnapping for ransom, extortion, organized crime ties, or a threat profile far too dangerous for locals. Authorities assess this situation as being well beyond their operational capacity to manage alone. The arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation during the earliest hours became a critical data point that local observers began tracking with intense clinical focus. It indicates that law enforcement categorized the event immediately as something far more sinister than a simple voluntary disappearance. Beyond the FBI, investigators are scrutinizing digital footprints, specifically the unblinking eyes of surveillance cameras surrounding the property. Detectives analyzed every frame recorded during that narrow, violent window of time. The official narrative confirms cameras captured the scene. Police acknowledge that the investigation hinges on this footage. Yet, the specific frames they are viewing remain strictly guarded secrets. Local reports, unverified but persistent, point to a single source claiming a second, hidden lens captured the entire sequence of events. The theory suggests the FBI holds footage from a secondary angle that has never been officially acknowledged in public statements. This stems from community-level intelligence gathering and must be treated as an unconfirmed, though highly intriguing, investigative lead. No official source or mainstream outlet has verified this claim. It remains a dark thread that many are still pulling. If the tapes were empty of evidence, investigators would have dismissed them quickly to calm the growing public fear. They would not provide granular detail, but they would signal that the footage was irrelevant. Instead, they have maintained total silence. This tactical quiet suggests the cameras caught something evidentiary, a visual record of a crime that investigators are not ready to share. We see the same calculated pattern with the DNA samples as with the video: confirmation of existence, absolute silence. The state admits the evidence exists, then shuts the door. This deliberate, tactical posture is designed to protect the case. Every move is precise. Observers interpret this strategic silence as a clear signal that both categories of evidence contain incriminating content. Pottery evidence alongside the physical crime scene. A physical layer of evidence exists here that runs parallel to the DNA mixture, though it remains largely unexamined. It bridges the gap between the biological traces and the physical environment in a way that mainstream reports have missed. To those following closely, the flower pot is a landmark. The Pima County Sheriff's Department officially confirmed recovering DNA. Forensics teams scoured the residence. The results were definitive. They found biological material. The reality is stark. DNA was recovered from the scene, and it did not belong to Nancy Guthrie. It was not Nancy Guthrie's DNA. The lab continues to process this foreign signature to identify the unknown contributor. The exact coordinates of where this DNA was lifted inside the home remain a closely guarded secret in reports. Independent analysis of news footage has identified specific zones that received the most intense forensic processing. Teams focused heavily on entry and exit points, suggesting the intruder's path was marked by more than just forced locks. Location is everything. It tells the story of movement, intent, and violent struggle. It is not just about what was found, it is about the volume, the placement, and the architecture. Traces found at a threshold carry a different investigative weight than material left in a common living area. DNA found at a point of ingress suggests a predator. Material in a central room suggests a guest. When material is found where a person has no business being, it becomes a smoking gun rather than a routine trace. Observers have meticulously mapped these forensic details against the known blueprints of Nancy's private residence to find the truth. That reconstruction is ongoing, raising pointed questions about the exact concentration of this complex biological mixture. The data points toward a specific high-density area of biological material that suggests a prolonged or violent physical encounter occurred. These are clinical, observer-driven, analytical questions. They are not confirmed by the state. They are distinct hypotheses. However, the level of investment is undeniable. Authorities do not commit these kinds of massive resources, multiple units, and federal agents to a simple, open-and-shut case. Specialized units and FBI experts use genealogy to map a ghost's tree. They performed a surgical sweep of every square inch of that property, searching for the smallest cellular signature. The complex mixture did not come from a lazy swab of a table or some random surface. It was pulled from a scene by experts who knew exactly where the predator had left a piece. The physical geography of the home and the DNA evidence are a single, unified narrative. The sample location, the number of contributors, and the identity of those people are all inextricably connected. Every one of these facts points toward a single coordinate, a central question that defines this. Since February, the public has fixated on a specific medical clock, a pacemaker timeline that could break this case. Reports from local, non-official sources suggest Guthrie may have been fitted with a pacemaker, a detail requiring careful attribution. If true, this device provides a clinical look at her final hours after she was left at home on January 31st. These devices archive biological data, recording heart rate fluctuations and physical activity that can be extracted directly from memory. Neither official press releases nor police statements have validated this claim. It remains a piece of unverified community intelligence. Should the device exist, it becomes a surgical tool to carve out a precise window of time for her final moments. It would isolate exactly what occurred behind closed doors that night, as every investigative path converges on those same hours. That window includes the final text or call, the exploited entry point, and the biological traces left in the shadows. This evidence features a complex DNA mixture with several contributors, shadowed by a total investigative silence. The authorities possess the data required to settle these fundamental public anxieties, yet they maintain a rigid, calculated silence. They have deferred clarity for tactical reasons, leaving the community to obsess over the distinction between suspects and DNA. In February, officials made a definitive move, publicly clearing every family member, including siblings and their respective spouses. This move was designed to shrink the list of potential killers and, theoretically, lower the temperature of public fear. On paper, those in Nancy's inner circle are innocent, but the professional investigative community sees a different problem emerging. This clearance creates a technical vacuum, raising a forensic paradox that law enforcement has neglected to formally address. When police formally exonerate family members, they follow a cold, analytical protocol involving several simultaneous lines of inquiry. Detectives scrutinize every movement during the critical window, verifying alibis with the detachment of a mathematician. They cross-reference locations, looking for a break in the logic of their movements, while weighing financial and personal motives. In any scene where biological material is recovered, the state demands reference DNA swabs from everyone with legitimate access. These samples are run against the crime scene evidence as a matter of cold, routine procedure, not suspicion. A simple buccal swab provides the baseline needed to filter out anyone who had a lawful reason to be there. It is a process of systematic subtraction, identifying and removing known quantities to see what remains in the profile. If a family member's DNA appears in the mixture, the investigator notes the match and strikes them from the list. The public is not questioning if the cleared family members were tested. That is a foregone conclusion in modern forensics. Failing to run those comparisons would constitute a catastrophic break in standard operating procedure for a case this high profile. The real question, the one that lingers, is what the results of those specific DNA comparisons actually revealed to investigators. In the cleanest version of this nightmare, every single strand of DNA found in the mixture matches a known cleared individual. That would mean the biological evidence is closed, accounted for by people who had every right to be in the home. But there is a second, far more unsettling possibility. The mixture contains traces of someone who should not exist there. This means one or more contributors to the forensic evidence remain entirely unidentified, matching no one on the police list. These phantom components are active leads, ghostly genetic signatures of individuals who have yet to be named or caught. The public is not currently siding with one theory over the other. They are simply observing the void in information. They are pointing out that law enforcement has strategically avoided confirming which of these two forensic realities is true. That precise tactical refusal to clarify the state of the DNA mixture is the jagged edge of this entire investigation. Consider Cioni. He was cleared. But clearance is not the same as being absent from the biological evidence. A man can be exonerated and still leave a trace. His DNA could be identified, logged, and then dismissed. Or, it is possible his genetic signature was never present in that specific sample collection to begin with. Regardless, the legal question of guilt is isolated from the scientific question of whose skin or blood was left behind. The public demands to know if every single contributor in that room has been identified and neutralized by the state. It is no longer about the family. It is about every other person whose presence has gone completely unexplained. Every microscopic fragment in that complex biological puzzle, from the primary source to the faintest trace, holds the truth. We have constructed this entire narrative around a single question, and the reason for this structure is vital. We have broken down the forensic protocols and the cold logic of suspect elimination to ensure the weight of this is felt. This question only carries its true, terrifying power when you look at the raw evidence with surgical precision. In the long, quiet weeks since this investigation began to stall, from the moment the first squad cars arrived, a sanitized and predictable rhythm has defined how the mainstream press handles the Nancy Guthrie case. News outlets have dutifully echoed the verified facts, the presence of DNA, the clearing of family, and the heavy involvement of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Yet, in the cold and forensic light this community demands, they have failed to put the one logical interrogation directly on the screen. That specific question is exactly what the physical evidence demands, and this frustrating pattern is far from unique to this investigation. Traditional news cycles often prioritize official police narratives instead of applying surgical logic to the silence and gaps in those statements. When the Sheriff's Department issues a brief stating family members are no longer suspects, the headlines simply echo that the family is cleared. The deeper inquiry, which specific family members had their DNA isolated within the mixture and which did not, is a question that is rarely ever asked. You will not find that level of scrutiny in a 30-second news segment or buried in the columns of a local daily newspaper. It requires a forensic intuition that thrives in investigative circles but is tragically absent in the shallow waters of modern newsrooms. For weeks, this community has circled one heavy question, and its true significance does not lie in whether anyone here knows the answer. Its power lies in the fact that a definitive answer exists. It is held by the police, the FBI, and the clinical laboratory. The technicians who processed the biological debris from the Guthrie scene have the truth, while the public remains entirely in the dark. We are going to confront that question now, and I want you to maintain one specific piece of clinical context as we do. The second law enforcement chooses to speak either to confirm a fully resolved genetic map or to admit a mystery contributor exists, everything changes. That single moment of clarity will reveal more about the true trajectory of this hunt than any official statement we have seen so far. It will carry more weight than every carefully managed press conference held by the Sheriff's Department the moment the forensic mask finally slips. Inside the Guthrie home, the DNA tells a story of a chaotic and multiple contributor mixture that is a cold, verified forensic fact. The family, including Tomaso Cioni, the man who watched her walk to her door on January 31st, has been formally eliminated as suspects. Here is the heart of the matter. Has every biological strand in that forensic mixture been tied to a known, identified human being? Has law enforcement obtained reference samples from every single person who had any documented or even plausible access to that residence? Every relative, every in-law, and every contractor who crossed that threshold during the relevant period, has their genetic signature been thoroughly checked? Have they run those references against every microscopic component of the mixture to produce a result that accounts for every single contributor? Not just the inner circle or the obvious names, but everyone, because if the answer to that forensic inquiry is truly yes, if the puzzle is solved, why has the Sheriff's Department remained so hauntingly silent about the complete resolution of the DNA mixture? Think about the power of such a statement. It would not need to name a suspect or expose the inner secrets of the prosecution. It would not endanger the investigation to simply state that the biological material recovered from Nancy's sanctuary has been fully accounted for. Every contributor identified, every trace explained, every genetic loop closed once and for all, leaving no room for a ghost. Such a declaration provides no shield for a killer and causes no harm to a future trial. It merely satisfies a massive void. It would provide the definitive closure to a forensic question that has kept this community awake and searching for many months. Yet, the local authorities have said nothing, and the FBI has mirrored that silence, leaving the evidence hanging in a dark void. Even CeCe Moore, who confirmed the complexity of this genetic puzzle on the record, has carefully navigated around the finality of the data. She admitted publicly that she realized this mixture is far more intricate and resistant to analysis than the public initially anticipated. She has not stated that the mixture is resolved. Nobody has, and the silence from the experts is starting to feel like a confession. We are not here to challenge the clearance of Tomaso Cioni or suggest that the police were wrong to move past him. This is not an accusation of negligence, but a demand for absolute methodological precision in a case where the margins are razor thin. We are asking if being cleared and having your biological material forensically reconciled with the crime scene are truly the same thing. In the clinical world of forensics, they are often worlds apart. A person can be ruled out while their cells remain behind. Having DNA at the scene is expected for a family member, it is simply a matter of accounting for it and moving on. That is the standard protocol when investigating the domestic spaces of victims, where familiar footprints are an inevitable part of the landscape. However, it is equally possible for a suspect to be cleared, while the genetic mixture itself remains a jagged, unresolved mystery. Clearing a name is a judgment of guilt. Resolving a DNA mixture is a cold, mathematical certainty. One does not guarantee the other. Both realities can coexist, but the question that haunts the edges of this case is far more disturbing to the logical mind. Does any part of the Nancy Guthrie DNA profile belong to a contributor who has never been named, swabbed, or identified? An unknown individual, a ghost in the machine whose presence in that house has no documented explanation and no genetic match. If such a profile exists, they are not just a background detail in a file, they are the shadow in the room. This biological profile is the absolute center of gravity. It is the physical evidence that, once identified, will terminate this entire investigation for good. This specific genetic puzzle is precisely why forensic genealogy and the specialized expertise of someone like CeCe Moore are vital to this case. If the lab reaches the stage where the mixture is fully isolated and every single microscopic contributor is accounted for, the DNA's job ends. At that point, the genetic trail yields its final secrets, leaving the investigation to rely on the more traditional, grueling pillars of detective work. We are talking about the cold analysis of surveillance, digital footprints, financial ledgers, and witness accounts currently held by federal and local authorities. Since February, the local community has been trapped in a vacuum, never knowing which of these two dark realities they are currently living in. Law enforcement possesses the answers, creating a stark, unsettling asymmetry between the internal investigation and the limited information released to the public. This information divide is the focus of everyone watching this case. However, we will not suggest how you should interpret that silence. The public response has been remarkably disciplined, proving to be one of the most rigorous and sourcing-literate audiences currently tracking a major disappearance. You have pinpointed critical discrepancies and subtle details that the mainstream media cycle completely failed to notice or report during their coverage. You applied clinical logic to the gaps that traditional reporters simply ignored. It is vital that this specific analytical pressure does not let up. The brutal reality remains unchanged. Nancy Guthrie has not been found, and her family is still suspended in a state of permanent waiting. Detectives confirm the case is active. The DNA is a volatile mixture of multiple people, and its resolution is not part of the record. There is a single question regarding the identity of every contributor in that biological sample that the mainstream press simply refuses to ask directly. This community will not abandon that specific line of inquiry until a definitive answer is finally dragged into the light of day. The search for the truth regarding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance continues as the investigation remains open and the pressure for answers builds daily. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is still waiting for the single tip that will finally bridge the gap between theory and the truth. The investigation now moves forward into the darker corners of this case, focusing on the specific movements around the Guthrie home and property. The focus shifts to the property access logs. Every contractor and subcontractor, documented or otherwise, who entered that site in the weeks before. Before Nancy vanished, a complex web of movement was recorded on that land, and the community is currently dissecting every name on that list. This account is a clinical examination of the facts currently available within the ongoing and active Pima County Sheriff's Department investigation. Every theory presented has been carefully isolated from the confirmed facts, allowing for a logical and objective evaluation of the community's specific findings. While individuals have been identified in the timeline, the court of law has yet to issue a single formal charge in this disappearance. In this jurisdiction, every person involved remains shielded by the presumption of innocence until the physical evidence says otherwise in court. These observations are built strictly on the foundation of public records and verified statements from high-level investigative experts and media reports. Authorities continue to solicit information, standing by for the one detail that could finally locate Nancy Guthrie and provide her family answers. The channel for providing information remains open, serving as a direct line to the detectives currently working this specific and open file. Our objective is not to interfere with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, but to maintain a necessary spotlight on their internal progress. We report only what is verified, clearly marking where the evidence ends and where the logical community source deduction begins for the audience. The official record remains wide open.